Hey guys, tonight we are traveling back 2,000 years to the long, mist-laden courtyards of the Han Dynasty, where your new 9 to 5, actually more like dawn to dusk, is to serve as a librarian for one of the empire's sprawling repositories of bamboo scrolls. Imagine the morning air, cool and damp, heavy with the smell of cypress wood and ink. The stone lions guarding the entrance stare out with their weather-smoothed eyes, completely unimpressed by you and your early morning yawns. You shuffle along the paving stones, robes brushing against your ankles, and the faint sound of cicadas reminds you that even insects were more awake than you. And, of course, you probably wouldn't last 5 minutes at this job, because, unlike modern libraries, the Han collections don't come with comfy chairs, computers, or even the faint hope of coffee. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're listening right now, I'd love it if you let me know your location and the local time down in the comments. I always find it fascinating to see who's drifting off across the globe. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You cross into the courtyard as the sky begins to shift from indigo to pale gray, the air alive with a soft chorus of sparrows. The library complex is larger than you expected, built in perfect symmetry to mirror the emperor's obsession with order. Rows of roof tiles curve upward at the corners, each one like a frozen wave. You hear the creak of gates as the first attendants arrive, yawning much like you, though with a bit more discipline. They know how serious this work is. After all, this isn't just a place for reading. This is where the memory of the empire is stored, slip by slip. Historians still argue whether the Han government truly intended these libraries to serve the common people, or whether they were mostly showpieces for the court. You, however, aren't debating policy, you're just trying not to trip on your robes while climbing the steps. A senior scribe eyes you with suspicion, as though you've brought the dust of the outside world into this sacred place. And dust, in fact, is enemy number one here. Dust, mold, and the occasional cricket who decided to snack on bamboo fibers. Inside the courtyard, the morning routine unfolds like clockwork. The incense burners are being lit at the entrance. Their thin spirals of smoke drift upward, mixing with the dew and catching shafts of weak sunlight. Someone mutters about how the last storm loosened a few tiles, and if they fall onto the shelves again, the scrolls will be ruined. It's a constant balancing act, preserving thousands of fragile slips in a building never quite dry enough to keep rot away. You walk across flagstones worn smooth by centuries of scholars' feet. One stone in particular dips so deeply it collects rainwater, which becomes a tiny mirror to the heavens. You notice it every morning, but you still catch yourself pausing to see your reflection, a sleepy, underpaid librarian staring back. Well, not exactly paid in silver, more like in grain rations and occasional respect. The empire doesn't value you like it values soldiers or tax collectors, but here you are, shouldering the weight of knowledge itself. A faint clang echoes from somewhere beyond the wall. That would be the bell that signals dawn's official arrival. You were expected to be inside before it tolls a second time, or else your supervisor, whose eyebrows alone could cut bamboo, will write your name into a ledger you very much don't want to appear in. You hurry past the guardian lions, noting the way their stone teeth glisten with dew, as if they had just finished an early morning breakfast of careless apprentices. As you push open the heavy wooden doors, the smell hits you first. Ink, dust, and cedar shelves, mingling into a fragrance both musty and oddly soothing. It's like the smell of old books in a modern library, only sharper, as though the bamboo itself is whispering. The scrolls are locked away for now. Your task in this first hour is not glamorous. You sweep the courtyard walkway with a straw broom, then wipe condensation off the entry tables. Yes, you studied for years to learn how to read complex characters, and yet here you are, starting your day with janitorial chores. Scholars may argue about Confucian ethics, but dust does not sweep itself. And speaking of Confucius, you can almost imagine him shaking his head at you. He would probably say, "Do not complain about menial tasks," or at least, "do not complain so loudly." One of your fellow librarians cracks a joke about how Confucius never had to mop water off scroll racks. Everyone chuckles softly. It's the only humor allowed before tea. The light grows stronger. You adjust your robes, tie your hair with a strip of cloth, and prepare to face the day's endless scrolls. A sparrow hops inside the entryway, pecks at a stray grain of rice, and then decides this is not the place for birds after all. Lucky creature, you think, as it escapes into the sky. The empire beyond these walls is buzzing with merchants, soldiers, and farmers. But here, inside this courtyard, time feels slower, more deliberate. Each step you take echoes as if carved into the record of history itself. It's only the first hour of your shift, and already your feet ache. But that's what it means to be a librarian of the Han. You are not just caring for scrolls, you're caring for civilization's memory. And that responsibility, heavy though it feels, wraps around you like the morning mist.
The doors groan as you slide them open, revealing rows of dark chambers where the scrolls sleep in their lacquered chests. These are not rooms you can just wander into casually. Each one is sealed with knots tied in silk cords because a slip of bamboo might be worth more than a chest of coins. You shuffle in, brushing past the cool stone walls, and the air changes immediately. Drier, colder, and carrying the faint metallic tang of ink mixed with cedar oil. You reach for a bronze key ring that jingles softly like wind chimes. Each key belongs to a different chest, and no one is foolish enough to forget which is which. Your supervisor once told you that opening the wrong storeroom was like mixing up a royal decree with a recipe for fish sauce. Embarrassing and possibly career-ending. So you pause, squinting at the scratched characters on the tags before selecting the right one. Historians still argue whether these collections were ever fully catalogued, or whether the sheer volume of bamboo slips made complete order impossible. Judging by the mountain of chests before you, you're inclined to believe the latter. Every chest contains thousands of slips, tied in bundles, each bundle whispering of farming records, poems, legal codes, or medical recipes. One wrong shuffle, and you'd spend the afternoon untangling history like a very boring knot. The first storeroom clicks open, and you're greeted with the scent of old smoke, traces of the fires used to harden the bamboo centuries ago. You carefully lift the lid, and there they are. Endless strips of bamboo, bound in cords, lying flat like soldiers on parade. Each strip is no thicker than a finger, carved with tight, neat characters that curve slightly where the knife pressed too hard. You pick one up, feel its smoothness, and marvel that this tiny sliver holds laws powerful enough to determine life or death. Of course, that gravitas fades quickly when you notice the mildew creeping in at the corners. Librarians spend half their lives waging war on mold. Goose feather dusters, sunlight carefully angled through windows, cedar shavings packed between the chests. Yet still the spores return, stubborn as tax collectors. You mutter a complaint, though quietly, since your voice echoes through the room like an accidental gong. One of your colleagues, already inside, is kneeling before another chest, muttering curses at a bundle whose silk cord has frayed. He looks up, sighs and jokes that if the empire collapses, it will be because a slip about chicken-raising schedules disintegrated before anyone copied it. You laugh, but softly. Joking about collapse is the kind of humor best confined to locked rooms. The morning sun filters through a tiny window cut high in the wall, painting a strip of gold across the floor. Dust motes dance in the beam like drunken scholars at a festival. You take a moment to watch them, allowing your mind to wander. What if one day, centuries from now, people stare at fragments of your handwriting and debate whether you really knew what you were doing? The thought is equal parts amusing and horrifying. And speaking of handwriting, you can't help but recall the time last month when a junior scribe accidentally inked a scroll upside down. For days afterwards, everyone teased him, saying he was pioneering a new school of inverted Confucianism. He didn't laugh, but you still smile whenever the memory sneaks back in. You continue opening the chests one by one. The cords are stiff, sometimes sticky with resin. Your fingers ache from tugging, but the ritual has a rhythm that's almost meditative. Pull cord, lift lid, check for pests, check for dampness, close lid, move on. Over and over until your body forgets it's even working. Perhaps that's why librarians last so long at this job. The monotony itself is strangely soothing. And yet, every so often, you stumble upon something unexpected. Today, it's a bundle labeled with characters you don't immediately recognize. You set it aside, making a mental note to ask a senior colleague. For all you know, it could be an obscure military manual or just someone's shopping list for more incense. Scholars still debate how many lost classics were hidden away in collections like these, never studied because no one recognized them in time. You sigh, because the idea that history might slip through your fingers while you dust shelves feels unfairly poetic. The floor creaks as you move deeper into the chamber. In the far corner, you hear a tiny scuttling noise. Mouse. You freeze, heart skipping, then see it dart across a gap in the wall. You breathe again, though you know you'll need to report it. The last thing anyone wants is a rodent gnawing through military treaties. Imagine the empire falling because of a mouse with a taste for strategy. You chuckle to yourself, quickly shushing your own laughter. By now, the incense from the courtyard has reached even here, thin tendrils curling into the shadows. The scent reminds you it's almost time for tea, but not yet. For now you finish unlocking the remaining storerooms, every turn of the key echoing like a soft drum beat against the stone. When the last lid closes, you rub your stiff fingers together, ink-stained and sore. The rooms are open, the scrolls safe, and the day's great unraveling of words can finally begin. You step back into the hallway, blinking against the sudden brightness. Your robes smell faintly of cedar, dust, and just a hint of mildew. You have only completed the morning's first task, yet already your shoulders feel the weight of an empire's paper trail.
You can almost feel your stomach protesting by now. But before you even think about food, there's the matter of ritual. No one begins the real work of cataloging the copying until the incense and tea have been properly arranged. You shuffle toward the small side rooms set aside for this purpose, a space both sacred and slightly cluttered, smelling of ash, damp wood, and something faintly bitter that clings to your robes long after you leave. The tea chest sits in the corner, packed with rough leaves that look more like shredded twigs than the delicate curls you buy in a modern shop. You scoop a handful into a clay pot, splash in water that's only halfway to boiling, and watch the pale green swirl rise like morning fog. It doesn't taste wonderful, more like grass steeped too long in a puddle, but it does the job. Your eyelids lift just a little, enough to remind you that you are still alive.
Someone once joked that Han librarians weren't kept awake by tea so much as terrified into consciousness by its bitterness. You sip, wince, and silently agree. Historians still argue whether tea at this stage of Chinese history was meant more for ritual purity or for flavor. Judging by your puckered mouth, you're leaning toward ritual purity. No sane person would drink this willingly for enjoyment, unless enjoyment meant bragging later about how strong your stomach is. Across the room, a senior scribe is arranging sticks of incense into a bronze burner shaped like a crouching tiger. The first spark of flame crackles, then soft smoke begins curling upward, thin as silk thread. You're expected to bow slightly, nothing dramatic, just a little acknowledgement that the day's labor deserves its blessing. So you bow, even though in your mind you're already dreading the bamboo slips waiting for repair. The incense fills the air with a resinous scent, pine and sandalwood mixed with something harder to place. You cough softly, not loud enough to attract attention, but enough to remind yourself that sacred smoke is still smoke. The old superstition says it drives away pests that might harm the scrolls. Whether that's true or not, you'll take any excuse for fewer mice. Remember that scuttling visitor from earlier? You find yourself muttering, half to the smoke itself, "Keep the mice away, please." One of your colleagues joins you, carrying his own steaming cup. He sits, stretches his legs out rudely far, and sighs like a man being crushed by the weight of eternity. Then, with complete seriousness, he remarks that the tea tastes exactly like boiled boots. You snort into your cup, almost spilling it. He grins, satisfied to have earned the first laugh of the morning. 3 jokes in, and it's not even noon. You silently declare him a dangerous man. The ritual isn't all humor, though. There's a moment where everyone settles into silence, holding their cups, listening to the faint hiss of incense burning down. You feel your shoulders drop, your breath deepen, and the whole building seems to exhale with you. Outside, sparrows are still chattering, but in here, time stretches long and smooth. You're reminded suddenly of a fringe story you once heard, that during the reign of Emperor Wu, a librarian accidentally spilled tea over a bundle of scrolls, staining them permanently. Instead of punishment, he supposedly declared it an experiment in preservation, claiming the tannins would protect the bamboo. No one could prove him wrong, and the tea-soaked scrolls were shelved like all the others. Whether that's true or not, you make a mental note to keep your cup far, far away from today's work. Another sip, the bitterness doesn't soften, but your mind begins to sharpen. The faint pounding in your temples eases. Your colleague mutters about how he'd prefer wine. You quietly agree, but add that wine would only make the characters blurred together. He grumbles that maybe blurred characters would look prettier than half the calligraphy you'll see today. You chuckle, quietly enough to keep the ritual's dignity intact. When the last of the incense stick crumbles into ash, the ritual is done. No announcement, no ceremony, just the quiet acknowledgement that now the day can officially begin. You set your empty cup aside, the clay still warm against your palm, and step back into the hallway. The smoky fragrance clings to your sleeves, following you like a loyal but slightly suffocating friend. The rooms ahead are filled with unread scrolls, cracked slips, and the quiet sighs of librarians resigned to their fates. You take one last deep breath of the incense-thick air, knowing that from here it's all ink stains and sore wrists. But for just this moment, with tea bitterness still on your tongue, you feel strangely awake, strangely steady, as though you could actually make it through the mountain of bamboo waiting for you.
The dust is back. It's always back. You sigh, grabbing the long-handled goose-feather duster that looks more like a carnival prop than a tool of scholarship. Its white plumes tremble in the air, soft enough to tickle but firm enough to scatter layers of stubborn gray from the bamboo slips. You shake it gently over the shelves, and the dust swirls into golden beams of sunlight like tiny ghosts rising reluctantly from their graves. The trick is to move slowly. Otherwise, the dust floats right back onto the same spot, undoing your effort. You pace the aisles, feathering each chest, muttering as you go. This is not glamorous work, and yet it matters.
Dust is a librarian's eternal enemy. Left unchecked, it invites mold. And mold, as you know, doesn't just ruin one scroll, it spreads like gossip in the marketplace. Historians still argue whether ancient custodians truly understood the microscopic causes of decay, or if they relied mostly on rituals and incense to banish the rot. What is clear is that they waged a daily battle with it, armed with feather dusters, cedar oil, and endless patience. You add your name to that long roster of reluctant warriors. You pause when you notice a faint nibble at the edge of one slip. Not mold, teeth marks. The mice have been at it again. You grumble, half amused, half horrified, imagining a rodent proudly reciting Confucian sayings after a midnight snack. You joke to yourself that if the mice ever develop literacy, you'll simply hand them the duster and retire. Nearby, a colleague sneezes loudly, sending another puff of dust into the air. You glare at him. He shrugs. This is the librarian's circle of life. Sneeze, dust, repeat. It's strangely comforting in its inevitability. You wipe your sleeve across your face and return to feathering, even slower now, savoring the hypnotic rhythm of the motion. The shelves creak as you shift bundles, sliding one aside to dust the surface beneath. Some cords fray as you lift them, silk giving way to time. You hum softly while working, the way you always do when your arms begin to tire. The tune isn't much, just a string of notes that sound like a lullaby sung through a yawn. But here, in this quiet chamber, it feels like the shelves themselves are humming back. And then you remember that peculiar tidbit. Some early libraries supposedly employed cats to deal with pests. Imagine that. Fat, dignified felines patrolling these aisles like furry supervisors. You grin, picturing a stern tabby seated at the catalog desk, pawing at misfiled slips. Whether that story is true or not, you'd welcome the help. Goose feathers do not hiss at mice. The sunlight shifts higher, making the dust sparkle like tiny stars before fading back into dullness. Your duster strokes grow slower, lazier. There's a strange peace in this repetition, as though you're erasing time itself from the shelves. Every bundle you brush clean seems to breathe easier, waiting quietly for the next hand to reach for it. By the time you finish, your arms ache, and your nose tingles with the residue of 100 tiny particles. But the shelves gleam, at least for now. Tomorrow they'll gather dust again, but that's tomorrow's problem. You rest the goose feather duster back in its stand, feathers fluffed and proud, like it knows it has earned a small victory. The mice may return, the mold may creep back, but for one shining hour, the library is fresh, calm, and ready. You stretch, yawn, and smile faintly, content with this small, quiet triumph.
The silence breaks with the shuffle of sandals and the low murmur of voices. Visitors have arrived. Couriers from the imperial court, their robes stiff with travel dust, their faces set in that look of polite urgency that says, "We have orders and you must obey them, no matter how inconvenient." You glance at your colleagues. Everyone exhales the same invisible sigh. The lead courier produces a bamboo tally, the official marker of authority, and announces his request. Military treatises, obscure volume, third chest of the western storeroom. His tone implies he knows exactly what he's asking for, but you've been here long enough to recognize the truth. He barely knows what's inside these walls. To him, the scrolls are interchangeable bundles of bamboo. To you, they're a maze. You shuffle off toward the storeroom, trying to recall where you last saw the requested title. Was it under the section on siege ladders or buried next to agricultural reports? Historians still argue whether the Han classification system was brilliantly logical or hopelessly confusing. Standing in front of rows of nearly identical bundles, You lean toward the ladder. The courier follows close behind, peering over your shoulder as though suspicion alone will conjure the scroll faster. You mutter, more to yourself than to him, "If the Empire depends on me finding this within the next hour, we're all in trouble." He doesn't laugh. Couriers rarely do. You rummage through chest after chest, fingers tracing chords, lips mumbling titles. At last, tucked between two unrelated works, astrological charts on one side, farming tax reports on the other, you find it. A slim bundle with characters so faded you wonder if anyone has opened it since your grandfather's time. The courier snatches it eagerly, bows, and vanishes as quickly as he arrived. No thank you, no acknowledgement of the dust still clinging to your sleeves. Another visitor steps forward. This one is less impatient, a scholar from the provinces with ink stains on his fingers and excitement in his eyes. He requests a commentary on music, some obscure section on how zithers were tuned 2 centuries ago. You raise an eyebrow, half amused. Out of all the knowledge in this building, he wants that. Still, you lead him to the shelf, dig through another chest, and hand over the bundle. He bows deeply, grateful, before shuffling off to the reading room. You can't help but like him better than the courier. And then comes the strangest request of the morning. A minor clerk insists he needs a scroll on dream interpretation, claiming it's crucial for the emperor's astrologers. You stifle a laugh. Imagine the fate of the empire hinging on whether someone dreamt of 3 geese instead of 4. Still, you find the scroll, its edges ragged, its text filled with cryptic notes. You pass it over, wondering silently if the stars themselves are rolling their eyes. These moments remind you that the library is not just a tomb for old words. It's alive, constantly pulled and prodded by the needs of officials, scholars, and the occasional superstitious. You are the silent hinge that connects them all, and though it can be tedious, there's a secret satisfaction in being the one person who knows exactly which dusty chest holds the answer to a question no one else can solve. The visitors leave one by one, scrolls clutched to their chests. The courtyard quiets again, though the air still hums with the faint echo of their footsteps. You return to your mat, rubbing your temples. Your day is only half done, and you already feel like you've carried the empire on your shoulders, hidden not in swords or coins, but in words inked onto bamboo. The inkstones are lined up like soldiers, black and squat, waiting for the day's first drops of water. You kneel at the low table, set out your brushes, and already your fingers twitch with the memory of yesterday's work. Copying is not glamorous. It's not even particularly comfortable, but it is the heart of your life here. And without it, the empire's memory would fade faster than dew on the tiles outside.